We did our own research, my firm, last year, and we looked at giving and giving intention for the future, right? It's a study that we've done now for 3 or 4 years. So we've got some pretty good, benchmarks in it. And one of the things that we see is that the majority of donors who say they're going to give as much or more this year as they did last year are those on the upper end of the income spectrum, right? They're those who are already giving sort of high mid-level gifts or major gifts. So in some respects, yes, you absolutely should be prioritizing engaging with those supporters. And in fact, we saw this. I worked with rescue missions and food banks and Salvation Army and other kind of local social service orgs for a long time. Back in the sort of 2008, 2009 financial crisis, one of the things that we saw was that organizations who had a robust mid-level and major gift program already were able to weather that economic downturn a whole lot better than those who didn't. And I remember talking to some rescue missions at the time and saying, you've got to double down on this. You've got to go and engage major donors. And they would say things like, we just never prioritized it because our direct mail did so well. We didn't have to care and we didn't have to pay any attention to major gifts. And then they were left scrambling. Well, the same thing happened during the COVID pandemic. There are some organizations who learned from 2008, 2009, had built programs and were scaling and were able to withstand things. There are others who didn't, and they're still picking up the pieces. Now, largely, we saw revenue gains during the COVID crisis, but there were a lot of organizations that simultaneously saw revenue gains in the top, say, 2 to 5% of their donor base and decreases elsewhere. But if you don't have enough people in that 2 to 5%, you're not going to cover the spread on everybody else, right? So from a math perspective, yes, you have to focus on mid-level and major and monthly sustain. But then when I think about what really is philanthropy and what's our role in fostering a generous culture and a philanthropic culture, it's much more than just how do we generate the most dollars, right? I really think that part of philanthropy is about how you live in a civil society and how we show up to support one another, right? So I think it's dangerous to say, let's just not think about those other people, those lower dollar donors, those lower mid-level donors. And instead, what I am promoting right now is how do we actually do better in building relationships with those people and treat them in a way that makes them feel like I see them as a human being and not just as a transaction or not just as an ATM. And they may never give a $50,000 gift. They may never give a $100,000 gift. We do know that a good number of them will consider leaving a charity in their estate plan or leaving a bequest down the line. But even let's say they don't. Let's say that this person's only going to ever give you a couple of $20 gifts 3 or 4 times a year. They're not any less valuable as a human being because of that, right? And the likelihood that they will ever increase their giving or increase their influence and share about your organization with someone else or be an advocate or any number of things like that only increases when we treat them well, right? And so with the availability and relative lower cost of data and digital production these days, there are a lot of things that we can do to focus on treating quote unquote lower dollar donors better and provide them with a much more valuable experience so that they come along with us in a way that's meaningful to them and still valuable to us without breaking the bank. It's not a 1-for-1, right? I wouldn't say if you have 100 major donors and 100,000 $20 donors, you should treat them the same exactly, and you should focus the same amount of resources. Certainly, if someone can give you a $5 million gift, you probably are going to have to put more resources to that and more focus, right? And it's going to make a bigger impact on whatever your cause is, because there's a very little window to replicate that versus being able to do some of the other stuff on the lower end of the file. But at the same time, I think it's really short-sighted to just abandon everybody but the major donors.